Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kimberly Guilfoyle Show, live on Rumble, where facts come first and where news is done right. And we begin today with more major news on the Trump America First agenda, delivering safety and security for we, the American people. As border crossings are imploding and the border is as secure as it's ever been. Watch.
Yesterday, the president said this, and I quote, "We cannot give everyone a trial because to do so would take, without exaggeration, 200 years. Now, the court has said that those subject to the statute needed to be given the opportunity to challenge their removal. To me, I interpret that as a sense of due process. How do you interpret that?
I think due process was given, like the Maryland father, the MS-13 terrorist that was removed. He had due process. He was ordered removed by 2 different immigration judges. But here's what they're doing. Here's the plan. The Biden administration overwhelmed the system. 10.5 million people came to the border. They know it's going to take years to get through the court docket. By then, they're hoping there's another Democratic administration in. They'll have U.S. citizen children. Then all of a sudden, nobody wants them removed. We're spoiling their plans to have future Democratic voters and through a census, have control of the House. Through a census vote, Democratic sanctuary cities get more seats in the House. This is their plan. That's why they overwhelmed the system. That's why they didn't detain them. When they detain them, they get a hearing in 35 days. They released them. Now it's going to take 5 to 7 years. They're going to keep playing this game through the immigration courts, through appeal after appeal after appeal, district judge, to slow us down, because their hopes is they'll gain power again, then they can warrant amnesty to 10 million illegal aliens that are released in this country illegally. That is their plan, and we're trying to remove these public safety threats and national security threats as quick as possible. They're putting every roadblock imaginable in front of us to prevent us from doing that.
Border Patrol is also reporting record low levels of gotaways, a daily average hovering near just 80 over the past month, standing in stark contrast to the chaos under the previous administration. But rather than acknowledge these victories for America, Democrats are doubling down on their obstruction and attacks, trying to undermine everything President Trump is doing to secure our nation and grow our economy. They seem determined to oppose America first at every turn. Here's just one example.
Why, Congressman, are you in El Salvador? You are there for an El Salvadorian man who was a resident illegally of Maryland. You're a congressman from Florida. Why are you in El Salvador?
Well, we're here because a man who had protected status in Maryland, a Maryland man, union member, worker with a citizen wife and beautiful children, was taken out of his state and out of the United States back over here without due process. And for us, we're here for a couple of reasons. Number one is because every person in our country deserves due process. And we want to make sure that we draw the line here at Kilmar Garcia, because it's not just about him. It's about the fact that in the Oval Office, Donald Trump brought up that he wants to do the same thing to quote unquote homegrowns being U.S. citizens, a complete violation of our Constitution. I don't want to wait till it gets to that point. The reason I'm here as a congressman representing Orlando, Florida, is because I've received hundreds and hundreds of calls and emails and mail from my constituents. I represent a lot of immigrants. I represent a lot of people who see themselves represented in this situation. They're saying, Congressman, do what you can now, because it's him today and it can be one of us tomorrow.
But nevertheless, President Trump is delivering at home and abroad, pushing our NATO allies to meet their defense spending obligations, making it clear that America first means fairness and shared responsibility on the world stage, and ensuring Europe pays its fair share in deterring aggression. Here's the president laying it all out. Watch.
As you pointed out, the former Secretary General of NATO is here, Mr. Stoltenberg. How important is the NATO defense alliance, Mr. President? Is it sacrosanct from your perspective?
Well, it's a very interesting question. It's certainly very important for Europe, and I think without us it wouldn't be as nearly as powerful. And as the former Secretary General, who did a great job, can tell you, I played when I was there a very big role in making sure that NATO is funded by the 28. At that time, they had 28 countries, including us, because many of the countries weren't paid, and they ended up being paid, you would say, and the Secretary General was very nice about it. as far as I was concerned. Other presidents went in, they made a speech, and they left. And that kept going on. And, in the meantime, they had no money. And the United States was paying far more than its fair share. You could say that they were paying, I actually said sometimes it looked like 100%. And it was unfair. And the two of us worked very well together, and we took care of the situation.
And joining me now, senior editor at the Daily Signal, author of the new book, Woke-topus, Tyler ONeil. Thank you so much for being back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly.
All right. So there's a lot to cover. First off, President Trump, continues his push for burden sharing with NATO allies, demanding they meet their commitments, which is important, especially, concerning the ongoing situation with Russia and Ukraine. What's your read on the effectiveness of this strategy, and how does it relate to all of the different issues, whether it be the border, bureaucracy, and everything in between?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. We've had many presidents repeatedly say that our NATO allies have to put, they have to put up or shut up. They have to actually follow through on their commitments. And none of them before President Trump have actually done anything to really force their hands. And I think this is an important thing because, NATO needs to be an alliance. It's not just a thing where the United States is suddenly covering for all these other countries. We have to have partners. We don't have to have children. And essentially, we're allowing the situation to be that the United States is the only adult in the room. And that is unsustainable. I think it's very important for the United States to say, if you're our allies and you're part of NATO, you need to do your part. And we've seen NATO grow recently. It's been really glad to see Sweden and Finland enter NATO amid the really horrific war that's been going on in Ukraine. But every NATO partner has to show that they're a partner, and that means fulfilling their end of the deal.
No, you're right about that. And we're seeing that the swamp does have teeth indeed. A new poll of federal workers shows just that. What did you find?
Yeah, this is a really shocking development. And this is from RMG Research, a poll by Scott Rasmussen. And he asked a very revealing question. I think it's a very key one. He said, he went to these federal bureaucrats and he was able to get, I'm not entirely sure how he did this, but he got people who are working in the federal government in Washington, D.C. And then he narrowed that down further. It said all those who are making $75,000 a year or more. So these are a group of people he calls federal government managers. And the Democratic side of this group has really effectively made themselves a deep state in the Trump administration. And it may come as no surprise that people who voted for Kamala Harris, even though they work for the government, say that politically they oppose the administration. It was something like 76% of them said that. But there was this really important question. He said, if Trump gave you a lawful order that you thought was bad policy, would you follow that order or do what you wanted to do anyway? And 75% of these deep staters, these bureaucrats who voted for Kamala Harris in the last election, said they would disobey that lawful Trump order. And of course, 80% of those who voted for Trump said they would follow the lawful Trump order. Of course, it was a little surprising to me to see that as high as 18% of those who voted for Trump said they would not follow the order. That really surprised me. Although I have to say, it's a smaller number than it probably was in 2017 when the federal bureaucracy was almost entirely opposed to the sitting president.
Wow, and add to the mix, activist judges are also at the center of the conversation. They are fine with Biden letting in illegal immigrant criminals, but they have a problem with Trump deporting them. Why is this?
Yeah, this is a really horrible development because what essentially you have is the situation where Biden pulled out all the stops to pull people here illegally. He decreased enforcement at the southern border. He also had this ridiculous CHNV program taking Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and importing them into the United States at taxpayer expense. And when President Trump tries to remove people who were unlawfully brought here, to remove especially the worst of the worst, that's where he's starting with gang members, those who are part of this horrible MS-13 gang, and he's trying to deport them. Meanwhile, the left is having a fit, and they're saying, how dare you deport anyone? Everyone needs due process. And it's like, well, yes, people, citizens in particular, deserve due process. But when you're talking about illegal aliens who are not lawfully in this country, who are then also violent criminals, there's a real question as to what the government owes them, if anything, besides a ticket out of the United States as soon as possible.
Yeah, and let's talk about the roadmap, for the executive branch when, judges inflict these left-wing politics, into their decisions.
Yeah, it's really... So what we're dealing with is no less than a judicial insurrection. And it's multifaceted here. My book, The Woktopus, The Dark Money Cabal, Manipulating the Federal Government, focuses on the far left activist groups that staffed and advised the Biden administration. Many of these groups are now suing the Trump administration to prevent the people's elected president from fulfilling the promises that he made to the American people. And they've been able to find many of these judges. And the whole system is so corrupt because what they do, these groups that used to have power in the Biden administration now are ticked off that they're going to lose their power and not have their preferred policies enshrined into law. These groups find specific areas where they do what's called judge shopping. Right. So they see which court is most likely to support me and give me the order that I want to block President Trump. I'm not going to sue necessarily in the place that makes sense for the lawsuit, where the parties of the lawsuit are. I'm going to find an excuse to sue in Washington, D.C., right, to sue in New York, to sue anywhere else. Yeah, and then they'll get these injunctions. And so many of these judges, some of these judges have ties to these woke NGOs themselves. And many of these judges are issuing these injunctions saying, no, the entire federal government can't take X policy, or they can't defund a woke program because I think that somewhere in my purview as a judge that they're violating the law here. And the only relief oftentimes is to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And even then, you're not guaranteed that this order is going to be struck down, that the administration will be able to pursue its actual agenda as, the president promised the American people. And so right now, there are a few really important cases making their way to the Supreme Court. One of them is the birthright citizenship, so-called birthright citizenship case, which is a really excellent case. I mean, this is where we have this longstanding policy which never made sense under the 14th Amendment. If you actually look at the people who were supporting the 14th Amendment, they did not write the amendment to make it so that anyone who comes to the United States and has a child can have an anchor baby. Like, that never entered their minds. That was not what they were trying to do. And yet, judges in the past ruled that that's essentially what has to happen. Now the Trump administration is saying no, they are going back to the original reading and saying this doesn't make sense. They've appealed this. Of course, a judge issued an order to prevent the Trump administration's action from going forward. But now that's been appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court took up the case specifically to address these nationwide injunctions. So I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will finally say, look, judges, you can't issue an injunction that prevents the administration from doing everything. You have to rule only for the parties in the case.
Yeah, I think it's a really important, a legal, due process and procedure that must be followed, and I hope they rule on it very quickly. So let's talk about this because, ironically, our tax dollars are funding all of this. And I know you recently did a deep dive into some of the money trail. What is the most shocking of what you uncovered, and what are some of the latest developments?
Yeah, so this is also part of my book where I went through and talked about the immigration industrial complex. And this is a system of NGOs. And, it was, as a Christian, it was shocking and, really horrifying to me to see my faith weaponized against the legal process, because you have many of these groups that started with noble intentions. Their goal was to help refugees, to help legal immigrants in the United States. They're Christian organizations, groups like Catholic Charities, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And yet now, under the Biden administration, and even a little bit before that, I mean, unfortunately, the first Trump administration was so hampered by the deep state that they were not able to prevent this from happening. But these groups received oodles and oodles of money from the federal government to house and transport illegal aliens across the country. And so they became what I call the immigration industrial complex, because essentially what happened was Biden said, let's open the border. These groups got money. They were paid by your tax dollars to take illegal immigrants and put them across the country. And it was all in the name of helping refugees. But many of these people, they're not really refugees. The system has been so abused that the threshold for refugee has been lowered. And then even more than that, you have all these illegal aliens who came into the country. They were given a court date and sent on their merry way. Most of them never actually go into court to resolve their issues. And so these people are transported across the country. Thank God the Trump administration said, we're not going to do this anymore. And they canceled the grants for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And the U.S. CCB made a big announcement recently where they said, we're no longer going to do these programs. And here's the kicker. It said these programs could not be funded by private donations. They had to be through U.S. tax dollars. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, all right, there are a couple of legitimate things that this program did, but it all needs to be like, Americans are a generous people. I, as a Christian, I fund organizations that I believe that are doing good work. And I believe many Americans do likewise. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has a lot of programs. They should be able to raise private funds to help those who are truly in need, those who, they have human trafficking victims. They have people that they have helped in this program that, of course, those are the ones they immediately talk about. Meanwhile, they say, pay no attention to all the illegal aliens who are also helping. But those narrowly tailored programs that can be funded by private donations should continue. There's no reason why our tax dollars should be forced to help people in these situations, and especially not anyone who is violating the law, coming into this country illegally, or being flown in by President Biden. I mean, it's all such a crock. And the idea that our taxpayer dollars that that we're forced to pay at the end of a gun by the U.S. government were used not just for, the occasional charitable cause, which is like, even then, I'm not entirely sure that our taxpayer dollars should be used in this way. But Americans could understand if they're being used to transport illegal aliens across the country. And the Heritage Foundation's Oversight Project found that these illegal aliens went to every single congressional district in America, except for one of them. So this was, this is, if you talk about the great replacement theory, I mean, this has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with democratic elites that want to import a new underclass so they can have permanent power in this country.
Yes.
And that's the thing. It's not about racial issues. It's about them bringing people in who are not real. Yeah. I mean, it's infuriating to me also because I grew up with legal Mexican immigrants who I really respect. And, every time that one of these illegals is allowed into this country, is allowed to receive taxpayer-funded benefits, is allowed any of these things, that is a humongous insult to the people who went through the process, who honored our laws, who I'm very proud to call my fellow Americans.
No, you're right about that. I couldn't agree more strongly. But so how does this all tie into, trade policy? Touch on that, if you will. Is there a nexus that you have found, between border security and, of course, economic security?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think when it comes to trade policy, it is mostly different. But when you're looking at the threat of China, China in particular, there have been a lot of Chinese nationals who came in through that open border. Many of them had been focusing on our military bases. I mean, this is a story that I don't think got as much attention as it needed to in the Biden administration. But you had Chinese nationals who were scoping out our military bases. We know about the Chinese spy balloon, but they were also doing other things. They've been trying to infiltrate our country in so many different ways. And so when President Trump stands up to China and says, no, we are going to fight for equal trade, and he imposes tariffs on the People's Republic of China, that's something that, many Americans have long wanted a president to do this. And we will see where the ultimate negotiations end up. I know that President Trump has said that the high levels in the trade war right now are not going to be continued. But I'm really glad to see a president standing up to the People's Republic of China that has been so aggressive in trying to infiltrate our country and take advantage of us on the global stage.
Democrats seem, to criticize President Trump, regardless of the outcome, even going so far, as to go to bat for, which is so shocking and wild to me as a former gang prosecutor, like they're lovers of MS-13. How's that working out for them? Because it's just so politically repulsive.
It really is. I think the American people are waking up to this. And of course, the Democrats like to wear it on their sleeve. They're saying like, oh, this is all about due process. This is about making sure the system works the way it should. But President Trump can just hold up those pictures of the MS-13 tattoo. And I'm just like, this proves, I always knew that the left was going to have a conniption when President Trump honored his promise to start deporting the worst of these illegal aliens. But, I never expected that we would have a Democrat go down to, I think it's Nicaragua, and say, like, I am not leaving until the United States agrees to bring back an illegal alien who is an accused gang member who we have evidence. I mean, it's just the story, the Babylon Bee almost could not create
it's just
better
so
satire.
Ridiculous. It's insanity. But that's who they want to stand for. That's the party that they are representing. Like they're there for the misunderstood, deprived MS-13 due process sufferer. I don't think so. But what is it you think about the left that, gravitates towards these type of criminals? Because that's what they are. I mean, does your book offer any insights or answers to kind of, what's behind this?
Yeah. Well, on the issue of criminals in particular, I talk about the influence of George Soros, who his son Alex is now running the Open Society Foundations. But George Soros poured a ton of money into getting these weak on crime prosecutors elected across the country. And they have made things less safe on American streets. And, what this does is it creates a new divide a new class divide in America, where if you want to be safe, suddenly you have to live in specific areas where you have to increase the amount of security. You have to do certain things that are easier for the elites to do, but not as easy for most Americans who actually have to make concrete decisions about how they spend their money. It reminds me of this week, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was saying, this was a school case where they're trying to push LGBTQ books on kids in schools. And she said, why is this an issue? you can just have an option. Everybody has a choice that they can put their kids in a different schooling environment. And there was nothing that was more out of touch to me when she said that, because there's a movement in this country trying to make it so that people have choices, so that regardless of your zip code, you can choose whether to send your kid to the public schools, which are being infiltrated by woke, or you can send them to alternative options. You can homeschool, you can send them to a private school, you can send them to a choice school, you can send them to a private Christian school if you want to, like all of these things. And I want us to have an America where you have a choice, where you have a realistic choice. Ketanji Brown Jackson was acting as though everyone automatically has this choice, as though it was already the case that school choice is instituted throughout the country. And it's like, I'm sorry, no, this is an active debate, and it's only an active debate because you on the left are infiltrating our institutions and weaponizing them against us and trying to hold our kids in these schools that you are dialing the woke up to 11 in. And it's the same issue with crime, because you see these people like George Soros who are funding these prosecutors who are going weak on criminals. And when you go weak on criminals, you make it so that those who are already wealthy can protect themselves, and those who are struggling are forced to deal with the consequences of the horrible behavior of letting criminals out of jail. And so this divide, and this goes to immigration too. It's all about creating a stratified society where the wealthy woke can just do whatever they want with no consequences, and everyone else has to deal with the consequences of the bad behavior that they're pushing.
Yeah, it really is unbelievable. And, you've uncovered so much, but there seems to be massive evidence of grant fraud and much more. How much criminality is there to what you've discovered thus far?
Yeah, well, so what I focused on was all funding that was actually legal. And
you're like your original Doge.
Yes, yeah. Well, I started. Now, hopefully, Doge is going to find, and I want to see from Doge more evidence that these grants that they had, as you were saying, that they're actually fraud. Because if you ask me, waste and abuse, 100%. And we had these
but
gold
how do you
bars.
jump then to criminality of fraud?
Exactly. That's the real issue. Yeah. And I think the easier case to be made for that is in the EPA, where the Biden administration shoveled money out the door as fast as they could. And they started giving it. I mean, some of these groups that received this money had barely dealt with $1 million. And then suddenly they're being given $1 billion. I mean, that's the sort of discrepancy here that we're seeing. Now, that raises a lot of questions. The problem is the administrative state has a lot of leeway when it comes to making these grant moves. So proving fraud is going to be a lot more difficult than it first meets the eye. The important thing, as we've seen with Doge, is the Trump administration coming in and saying, we're not going to fund this crap anymore. We're going to cut these grants off. And we're going to do everything we can to peel that money back, because what I found, as you said, I was like the original Doge, following the money behind these woke activist groups before the Trump administration came in. And then what Doge found, all of this wasteful spending with USAID really dovetailed the influence of the dark money influence campaign that I uncovered in my book. Yeah. So that was something I testified before the Doge subcommittee about last month. But all of this, it is connected. We have to find the strings, and we're digging more and more. There's more to be found. But the thing that I'm most focused on is where this woke influence campaign has power, what they're doing. And I think there are a few places where they have a lot of power. One of them is these public sector unions in the federal government. And this is a thing that, like most Americans, when they hear the term public sector union, I think your eyes would glaze over. You tend to think a union is something noble, fighting for people who were abused in previous American history. These unions are engines of the Democratic Party, and they're engines of woke ideology. They're funding. There's this group, the American Federation for Government Employees. They are part of the AFL-CIO, which sent a lot of its money to the woke activist groups I describe in my book. AFGE has filed, I think it's somewhere around 25 lawsuits against the Trump administration. And this is a union representing bureaucrats who work for the taxpayers. And it gets worse because there's a system called official time where a bureaucrat can work for the union and get paid by the taxpayer for work done on behalf of the union. And that means that some of these lawsuits that shouldn't exist are being funded by your tax dollars if the bureaucrats who are helping the union are doing so on what's called official time. And this is a thing, like many in Congress have created bills to prevent this practice. I think there's an easy way they can do it. They can tax it at a rate of, say, 100%, and they can do that through reconciliation, so they don't have to pass a bill that, you know, that goes through the Senate with the filibuster. But yeah, there is a lot more to be uncovered, but what we know already is a grotesque abuse of the taxpayer funding.
No, that's and it's unacceptable. I really hope they drill down. I'm so happy that you were part of this process to shed some light on it and make sure that we can get to the bottom of it and find out if there is specific instances of fraud, not just abuse. I take that distinction seriously, and I was a former prosecutor. But Tyler ONeil, we're big fans of you and of the Daily Signal. Tell everyone where they can find you and where they can buy your fabulous book.
Yeah, thanks again so much for having me. So you can find me on X. The handle is Tyler2, the number 2, ONeil. You can find the Daily Signal on all platforms. We're very big on YouTube recently. We have Victor Davis Hanson doing a lot of videos for us. It's really fantastic.
He's brilliant.
We're on Truth Social. We're on, we're on X, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere except TikTok. And you can find the Woktopus on Amazon in particular, but across, really wherever fine books are sold, if you search the Woktopus, I was surprised to see how many bookstores, even in foreign countries, are selling it. It's so cool. Fantastic to see. But I just recently published the audio version, which is available on audio today. So
did you do the audio?
I did, yes.
Yeah,
I recorded
I've
it
done
myself.
that. That's not that easy to do, but let me tell you, people don't realize.
Yes, because the microphone is so big and it picks up everything.
Everything, yeah.
Yeah. That was quite an experience doing it. I was really glad that I could do it, but
yeah,
that's on Audible today.
Yep. Oh, fantastic. We'll have to check that out as well. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
Thanks again so much for having me.
All right, be good. And my closing remarks just ahead. And in the meantime, free speech is under attack, but Rumble refuses to back down. We have always believed in empowering independent voices, and now Rumble is taking it to the next level. We are excited to offer Rumble Premium, a completely ad-free experience with exclusive benefits for viewers and creators. And it's more than a subscription. It is a stand for free speech. Your voice matters. So join Rumble Premium. For a limited time, you can get $10 off an annual plan using promo code KG10. So just visit rumble.com/premium/KG10 and claim your discount today. Again, that's rumble.com/premium/KG10. Also, be sure to check out the good folks over at the 1775 Coffee Company. We talk about it all the time. Don't compromise on taste, quality, or your values. And 1775 coffee is brewed to perfection. It is crafted with precision and built on patriotism. The farm to cup process means there is quality, authenticity, and sustainability from start to finish. All the beans are ethically and exclusively single sourced. So why not? Try 1775 coffee today. Go to 1775coffee.com/KG for 15% off your first order. In closing, President Trump is showing what peace through strength looks like and what America first looks like. Demanding fairness from our allies, securing our borders, protecting the American worker and common sense American families all across the country. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to download the Rumble app, subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, like and share, and tell all your friends so they know exactly where to find us. And please also be sure to follow me across all platforms: X, Truth Social, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Stay tuned to Rumble for all the very latest breaking news coverage. And please don't miss Don Jr.'s big show tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern. I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon. God bless.